Jonathan Reed. Case file reopened. For weeks, his name existed only in dispatch logs and worried phone calls. A delivery driver who vanished during his routine route, leaving behind parcels, a vehicle, and a life defined by schedules and predictable stops. The disappearance was immediate, disorienting, and profoundly unsettling because it interrupted ordinary work and ordinary routines in a way that felt impossible to ignore. Jonathan Reed was last seen leaving a small warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He was 28, known among colleagues as meticulous, reliable, and quiet, with no prior history of disappearing or unexpected absences. His shifts were well documented, his routes repetitive, almost predictable, which is what made the moment of his absence so jarring. The day began like any other. Packages were loaded, vehicle checks completed, and the GPS tracking system logged his initial movements. But as the hours passed, a pattern broke. Stops went unrecorded. Calls went unanswered. Colleagues grew concerned. Supervisors attempted to track him down. And somewhere between his last confirmed location and the final unknown stretch of road, Jonathan Reed ceased to be seen. The missing person report was filed. Dispatcher logs, route sheets, and the GPS history became the skeleton of the investigation. But there was no single witness, no moment captured on camera, no event that clearly explained what had happened. There was only a growing sense of absence, measured in minutes that stretched into hours, then into the anxious patience of friends, family, and law enforcement. This was not the disappearance of someone careless or transient. It was the vanishing of a man whose life had been ordinary in every detail, except for the moment it wasn't. By the evening, the trail had gone cold. The vehicle remained unaccounted for. The route that should have been routine became a labyrinth of uncertainty. The investigation, at this stage, was constrained by time, limited evidence, and a city that had yet to realize how quickly a single day could fracture a life. If you follow unresolved cases, procedural gaps, and the truth buried beneath routine records, subscribe and stay informed as we examine the cases that slipped through the system. By the close of the first day, Jonathan Reed was no longer just a delivery driver. He was a case, and the record already was beginning to fill with gaps. The disappearance of Jonathan Reed initiated a flurry of activity, though each action was constrained by uncertainty. Authorities canvassed the area along his planned route, checking roads, rest stops, and neighborhoods he was known to pass. Colleagues retraced the steps they assumed he had taken. Family and friends were questioned. Every phone call, every message, every GPS ping became a thread, some leading nowhere, others contradicting one another. Despite immediate searches, no trace of him was found. His delivery vehicle, usually tracked and monitored, had disappeared from routine surveillance at a point where the roads intersected with the outskirts of a nearby riverfront. The timing and location were noted in the report, but offered no clear explanation. There were no witnesses who saw him enter or leave the area. The environment itself, a combination of narrow access roads, low light conditions, and water-adjacent pathways, complicated both search and analysis. Investigators relied on protocol. Search grids were established, volunteers were mobilized, and records cross-referenced. Lead officers logged every detail from the last confirmed GPS signal to the last known communication. Yet gaps persisted. The surveillance footage in the vicinity was inconclusive. Tip lines flooded with reports, many of which could not be substantiated. Even the most promising leads, sightings of a vehicle matching Jonathan's description, dissolved under scrutiny. As days stretched into weeks, the case entered a slow, bureaucratic stasis. The missing person file was kept active, but the urgency began to erode. Standard operating procedures dictated that follow-up checks and interviews continue, but in practice, attention shifted. Resources were limited, schedules conflicted, and the investigation's intensity waned. Each unanswered question, where he went, what happened to the vehicle, whether foul play was involved, became a shadow growing longer with time. Every day that passed without discovery emphasized the fragility of immediate investigative windows. The environment where he disappeared, roads flanked by water, docks, and isolated stretches, became both a physical barrier and a metaphorical one. The case was active, yet it was also quietly cold. By the end of this initial period, Jonathan Reed was no longer simply a missing delivery driver. He was a phantom in logs and GPS records. And the investigation, as thorough as protocol allowed, faced the limits of technology, timing, and human observation. Weeks became months. Months became years. And still, Jonathan Reed remained unaccounted for. The questions multiplied in silence. Where could he have gone? How could a routine day end in disappearance? What had been missed? Each of these questions persisted without answers, until the next phase of the investigation, decades later, would force the truth into daylight. Years passed. The initial urgency of Jonathan Reed's disappearance had faded into the procedural hum of cold case files. Yet within the archives, his name remained. A file untouched, but never closed. Investigators assigned to new cases occasionally reviewed it, noting the gaps, the missed opportunities, and the environments that had complicated the original search. Advances in forensic technology began to reshape the possibilities. Underwater recovery methods improved. Submerged vehicle detection, sonar scanning, and specialized dive teams offered capabilities unavailable in 1998. Previously inaccessible areas along the riverfront and dock systems, places that had been lightly searched or assumed clear, were now open to systematic, technological scrutiny. Cold case units revisited every note from the original investigation. Logs of GPS signals, dispatch communications, and witness statements were cross-referenced with environmental changes over the past decade. Patterns that had seemed meaningless began to align. The river's tides, dock maintenance records, and vehicle drift simulations suggested areas where a submerged object could remain undisturbed for years. Investigators returned to the physical scene, documenting currents, undergrowth, and debris accumulation. They coordinated with sonar operators and dive specialists. Every lead from the original investigation, even one previously dismissed as improbable, was reconsidered under the lens of modern capability. Family and colleagues, long resigned to uncertainty, were brought into these renewed efforts. Interviews were reconducted with refined questioning techniques. Memory gaps were filled by corroborating multiple accounts. Forensic psychologists and cold case analysts contributed to a reconstructed timeline, isolating likely points of disappearance and probable movement paths. By layering technology over the historical record and persistence over procedural stasis, the case slowly shifted from unanswered questions toward actionable hypotheses. The environment that had once concealed him, docks, water channels, and riverbanks, was no longer inaccessible. The tools now existed to uncover what had eluded investigators for decades. The file on Jonathan Reed had remained open, technically, for years. But in this period of slow, deliberate analysis, the pieces of evidence began aligning. A location, once dismissed, became central. A scenario, once improbable, became increasingly plausible. The invisible path from disappearance to recovery was taking shape. And finally, decades after the day he vanished, the first physical confirmation would emerge. The breakthrough came quietly, without fanfare. A sonar sweep of the riverfront docks, the very area first considered and then largely dismissed in 1998, revealed an anomaly beneath the murky water. A dive team was dispatched, methodically descending into currents that had shifted, silting and twisting the undergrowth over the years. Beneath a partially submerged dock, they found the vehicle. The interior was waterlogged, the frame compromised, but unmistakably identifiable as Jonathan Reed's. The discovery was confirmed through license plate records, vehicle registration, and detailed comparison with photographs maintained from the original investigation. Inside, the condition of the vehicle suggested that Jonathan had entered the area and, for reasons that could not be entirely reconstructed, become trapped. There were no signs of struggle beyond what the environment itself could cause. Strong currents, narrow gaps, and accumulated debris. Forensic analysis indicated he had likely been incapacitated shortly after entering the vehicle. Environmental factors, the river's movement, rising tides, and silt accumulation preserved both the vehicle and the occupant in place until recovery. Family members, long suspended in uncertainty, were notified with meticulous care. Investigators described the recovery, identification process, and environmental assessment. For them, decades of unanswered questions coalesced into confirmation. Jonathan Reed had been located. Relief was tempered by grief. Investigators experienced the weight of both closure and procedural reflection. Knowing that early hours, limited tools, and environmental challenges had allowed a single day's disappearance to extend into decades of ambiguity. The official report confirmed identity through dental records and physical verification, closing the technical question of who, while leaving some elements of how unresolved. While the vehicle's location explained why the initial search had failed, it did not fully account for the exact circumstances that led him there. Those questions remain in the file, preserved for future study if new insight or technology emerges. The breakthrough did not erase the years of uncertainty. It did, however, transform the case from a phantom in the records to a confirmed endpoint. Jonathan Reed's disappearance, long a matter of speculation and procedural limitation, now had an answer, measured in fact, not rumor. The file was no longer theoretical. It was real. The missing delivery driver had been found. The official determination classified Jonathan Reed's death as accidental. Environmental conditions, vehicle design, and the river's currents created a scenario from which he could not escape. While investigators cannot reconstruct every exact moment, the facts are irrefutable. The vehicle remained submerged, undisturbed, until located decades later. With this confirmation, the case transitioned from unresolved to closed. The file, once a quiet archive of questions and uncertainty, became a record of procedural learning. It highlighted the critical importance of early action, comprehensive searches, and revisiting overlooked areas. Each missed lead, each limitation of technology at the time, underscored the fragility of a search window and the weight of procedural diligence. For family and friends, the resolution brought both relief and grief. Relief in knowing the truth. Grief in the years spent in uncertainty. The investigators involved experienced a similar duality. Satisfaction that decades-long effort had produced closure, tempered by recognition of time lost and opportunities missed. The case serves as a reminder that even ordinary routines, a delivery route, a predictable day, can intersect with circumstances beyond control, and that persistence, patience, and technological progress are essential to uncovering the truth. Jonathan Reed's story is now documented, examined, and learned from. Yet it also stands as a testament to the enduring impact of a missing person case. How absence resonates far beyond the immediate timeline, shaping families, communities, and the practice of investigation itself. This has been a review of a case buried in procedure, preserved in logs, records, and the memories of those who waited decades for answers. If you value the truth behind forgotten cases, if you want to see justice through investigation rather than speculation, subscribe, share, and help tell the stories of those whose voices were once silenced, until the records finally spoke.